Welcome to Pirate Politics, where we prepare you for your next political conversation. I'm Jeronimo Cortina, a political science professor at the University of Houston.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus, also a political science professor here at the University of Houston. Thanks for hanging out and talking politics with us. An exciting week. Bad news economically for Donald Trump, but good news for Greg Abbott. He's been able to kind of parlay the success of the vouchers into the rest of a successful session. We'll talk about the dynamics, though, because it's not as smooth maybe as I led you to believe. There are definitely some hiccups happening in Austin these days.
Really?
Yeah. Surprisingly, the session has turned into kind of a bit of a mess. That's how things are.
Yeah.
But we're 100 days in and just, chaos reigns.
Yeah.
So we'll explore some of those details. But let's first talk about the economy, which obviously got bad news this week. The U.S. economy declined by about 3%, which was lower than the growth that happened the prior quarter. That's bad news, but obviously there's additional bad news, and that's the import surge, which actually hurts the U.S. economy, dragging down growth. Consumption slowed down to about 1.8%, which is not terrible, but lower than the 2.5% it was last quarter. So obviously not great economic news for Donald Trump. We've explored this in a bunch of different ways. Is this a spinnable outcome? Donald Trump is saying more or less like, we should just wait and it'll get better. Are people patient enough to do that?
I don't think people are patient enough, and especially because a majority of the electorate was primed in the past presidential election that once Donald Trump became president, the economy was going to be good. Yeah. Again, when you're changing industrial policy, that is a 4, 5, 10-year plan because it changes. The basic premise of, we should have our own manufacturing here, it's fantastic. Yeah. No one says the opposite, right? However, the way that he's planning to do that, it's a little bit more complicated, and you cannot fast track it in the way that he's attempting to do so. I mean, obviously, it would be great to have manufacturing here, et cetera, but there is a lot of complications into that. Just thinking about machinery, just thinking about all that stuff that needs to be in place, and also in part with global consumer trends, it makes things very, very, very difficult. So
true.
We'll see eventually and see if he's right or wrong.
Yeah, and like some places are having a manufacturing renaissance. Houston's one of them, right? There are plants being built by Apple and by NVIDIA, but like that is not something that's going to take a short while, like you said. In fact, actually, so reports this weekend in the Houston Chronicle said that this is something they had already planned, but they planned for like a 6 to 7 year window. Yeah, 6 to 7 year window. Yeah. There's a good chance, probably, that Donald Trump will be president by then. That'll be the subject for a totally different show. But like, that's too long for him to wait, for sure, politically. And also Republicans are definitely getting nervous. So we'll talk about this as we go, because it is in the context of having to write a new budget, which also has lots of cuts in it. So there's a lot of uncertainty happening right now. And the president can't just kind of will it into existence. I think that the messaging has been inconsistent and also probably isn't really hitting well, almost like his tweets to try to get Shedeur Sanders of the University of Colorado drafted higher, saying NFL owners are stupid for not doing it. I don't think that's the best strategy here, but obviously the president has got his own approach to this. So it did sort of work. He got drafted. So.
And maybe he knows something about football that I don't know, and probably that is true.
He watches a lot of cable news, so that's where that lives.
There we go.
But let's talk about something that you and I are both true experts in, and that's Canadian politics.
Absolutely, 100%.
Canada had elections this week. The Prime Minister, Mark Carney's Liberal Party, won the snap elections, which honestly, 6 months ago was not expected at all. It was seen to be a referendum on Trudeau. The expectation was that Liberals were going to get shellacked. They actually didn't. They did extremely well, even to the point where the minority leader, Pierre, help me with the French on this. I know you're an expert on it.
Wait.
I just set this up so you could speak French.
Merci beaucoup.
So Pierre Poilievre? How do you...
It's Poilievre.
Okay.
And sa carrière politique est terminée. Okay. His political career is 100% over.
Like, he lost his seat. Like, that's amazing to me. So not only, of course, did the Liberals win, but like he literally lost. Yeah. So I guess my question is, without getting into every detail about how the Canadian sort of system works, the expectation was that this was going to be a referendum on Trump, right? The Canadians were mad.
Absolutely.
There's nationalist surge against Donald Trump's efforts to try to like take Canada, I guess,
right.
or
51st
lure Canada
state,
to be the 51st state, right? And it obviously didn't work. So I guess two questions are really apparent. And one is, are moderates back? Are centrists in vogue again? And the second is, if this is a referendum on Trump, how does it affect the kind of trade policy with the U.S., which obviously is bubbling over at this point?
Well, I think it's going to have important implications, especially for trade policy, because now Ms. Carney has a mandate to protect Canada's moral value in the trade world. So that's the first issue. The second issue is that the way that Canada, its political system, it's a parliament. Yeah. So there's more voices than what we are accustomed here in the U.S. Two parties there. You have a marijuana party that got 133 votes in the election.
Where was that from?
And you have the Québécois, you have the New Democrats. So it's a little bit more complicated, but it certainly creates a way for people's frustration to be voted out in the voting booth. So that creates more dialogue and a very clear mandate of what Canada needs to do.
And a coalition, right?
Absolutely.
Because the majority party may not have a majority. In fact, we don't know that yet, actually. Right. But they'll have to cobble together kind of groups from the marijuana party and all the other parties, which seems easy enough. You just wait till 420 and then you tell them you need to join us. I think that's a good point, right? That they can kind of speak with a more unified voice. And the unified voice says, don't mess with Canada.
Exactly. And that creates political movements or our political systems all over the world work like a pendulum, right? So we're now living in the U.S. what happened in 2020, right? And we see that swing back to the right. Yeah. And then eventually that pendulum has to come down just for the laws of gravity. It's coming down. And in Canada, we saw that in steroids, right? Why? Because Donald Trump's intervention gave the victory to the Liberals.
So interesting, right? Now, the question is, as we've been mentioning, right, will it happen here in the U.S.? The likelihood is yes, right? The terms are obviously bad for the kind of president's party. And so I expect we'll see some of this, especially if this economic news continues to be bad. But the question really is, what is the Democrats' strategy? We've had lots of questions about this.
I'm sorry, what?
Who? That is the real question. And we'll talk about this actually, too, because Beto O'Rourke is back in the news, sort of hinting he might run. So we'll get to that in a second, which is a different strategic question. But the strategic question that the Senate's going to have to face is that Dick Durbin, one of the senators from Illinois, has announced he's not running again. He's been in office for 5 terms, which is a very long time. He's also the number 2 Democrat in the Senate. Basically, he's the kind of whip, and he's on the Judiciary Committee. This is a blow to the Democrats' institutional memory, but it does, I think, play up this question that's been happening the last couple of weeks, and that's that there's been internal tension inside the Democratic Party leadership about what to do.
Absolutely.
Should they back these people who have been in office for a very long time and kind of understand the dynamics of D.C. and maybe even national politics? Or do they do what David Hogg, who's a 25-year-old vice chair of the DNC, right? He was one of the activists surrounding a school shooting in Florida and has become kind of very famous for this. He's saying basically Democrats should move forward, right? We should definitely have like a new generation upcoming, and that means that you're going to basically have them. He hinted they should primary a lot of those Democrats who've been in office for a long time. The chair pushed back saying, we're not going to try to take out our own. That doesn't make sense electorally. But the message is still there, and that's that there's a tension between kind of old and young in the Democratic Party. So, there'll be a replacement. Some people say Brian Schatz, who's the senator from Hawaii, is going to get that spot. But Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota has also indicated she might want to run. Maybe it's the case too. Patty Murray from Washington wants to be in that spot. That would have some slight generational change. But generally speaking, what Hogg is asking for is like a real wholesale change, like replacing with very young members. I don't know if that's the right strategy here, but obviously Democrats are still looking for that moment. They're still looking for that sort of that message that's going to be the proper thing to tackle Donald Trump with, but and the right messenger too, which is also still in question.
So Durbin said it, right? Very clearly, he said, I know in my heart it's time to pass the torch. Yeah. He's 80. Yeah. Politics in the last, he has been there 40 years or 30 years or whatnot, have changed dramatically.
So true, yeah.
So I think that has a very interesting point. And that interesting point is if you don't renovate the marketing, if you don't renovate the strategy, you don't have anything to sell to the voters.
So true.
And clearly, voters are not buying what Democrats are selling.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And Chuck Schumer has said he's going to run again. And so he's
of course.
likely, of course, yeah. And that's the divide, right?
Exactly.
Some are saying yes, some are saying no. And I think that's the kind of real conundrum Democrats find themselves in. And they still haven't found that messaging yet. It's worth noting that it's only been 100 days. As a programming note, actually, we're going to talk all about the 100 days and our assessment of that for the whole show next week. But we know that obviously it's been a clunky 100 days. And Democrats are still trying to search for what that kind of messaging is to counteract. The problem is, of course, that they need to come up with that sooner than later. And
absolutely.
That is, any delay is going to create some political friction. So that's, I think, one kind of concern they have. Another concern they have is this week, what should pop up on the Trump Organization website, but hats that read Trump 2028. Alarming a lot of people who, as we kind of joked about earlier, think that maybe Trump might run. I should note to say that it doesn't say which Trump, it just says Trump.
Exactly.
There are a lot of Trumps.
Yes.
So it's conceivable that it's
Don
a different
Jr.,
Trump. Yeah, maybe.
Eric.
Right.
We're watching you.
Ivanka, maybe? We don't
Ivanka,
know.
yeah.
That's a possibility. So anyway.
Bernie's too young.
Too young still, yeah.
Yeah.
That's true, yeah. He won't be old enough yet. But who knows, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they could change the Constitution in the meantime.
Right.
But that freaked a lot of people out. So is this just kind of trolling politically, or is this like a real effort to balloon test this to see if people are going to bite on that?
I mean, people can bite all that they want.
Right.
I think that the constitutional rules are very clear.
Yeah.
There's been some, I guess, analysis in terms of how this could be done. But obviously, I have done a lot of analysis how I can get a six-pack, and it's never going to happen.
It could happen.
It could happen.
I think you're wrong. I like the path you've set out. Yeah,
but it's not going to happen.
Not do anything.
Right? It's not going to happen. Period. So the whole point is rewrite the rules, as they say in the Trump Organization's website. But it's something that it's how Trump does politics, right? In terms of being a disruptor, in terms of trolling, and obviously for the Trump Organization, in terms of making some money on the side with these hats or not.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, the buzz around it was big. You know that like a lot of the supporters are going to have one of these hats just to sort of mess with people, and maybe it doesn't go farther than that, but it works. I think you're exactly right. And this is, again, gets back to our prior point, which is the Democrats have to swing at something that's like a hittable ball, right?
Yeah.
You don't swing at a pitch outside the zone. It's not going to get you the base hit that you need.
Yeah, the curse of the cops.
No.
Sorry, my friend.
Don't speak of it. If we don't speak it, it won't be true.
Okay.
Also, we broke that curse, so yeah.
Yeah.
In any case, you're right. Like that's the problem. Is like if you let it curse you, then it will. And so Democrats are basically letting this curse them. And I think this round was better, but it won't be the last time something like this happens. So obviously, we're going to have to kind of watch this and see how it plays out. The other thing too, I was going to say is that like Donald Trump's legislative record's pretty abysmal, right? They haven't done much at all. They've only signed like 5 bills into law. All of the other things have been either just bluster, it's been a tweet, or it's been an executive order. These all have power and impacts, but it's not the same as legislating. So in a way, what the Democrats are trying to wait for, I think, is something tangible to shoot at. And so this is figuratively, kind of what they'd like to have. So we'll see how that plays out. And obviously the Durbin loss here is big for the Democrats as sort of the front of unity, but it's not going to change the dynamic of power, right? The Democrats are going to win Illinois, even though there might be some kind of tension about how to get there. So we'll see how that plays out. In a midterm, it's coming all too soon, my friend.
Yes, I know.
Let's switch and talk about Texas. Obviously, the Ledge is in session, so we're monitoring that every day and every night.
Yes.
One of the things that happened this week was interesting and ties to national politics, and that's that Donald Trump told Greg Abbott and announced that he was going to back every GOP member who supported the voucher vote. What do you make of the fact that Donald Trump is once again weighing into the voucher fight in Texas?
Well, I mean, he's something that he supports. It's part of his, I guess, national campaign to return education back to the states, even though 80% of education is already back in the states. But it's just a way of saying that. And politically, it's also very interesting because in his post on Truth Social, he said to my friends, including the Speaker of the House, Representative Boris, right?
Right.
So that gave him, the Speaker of the House, a huge,
That's a great point.
huge political capital, and then it's just mic drop and said, "You're gonna do what I'm telling you to do."
I think it's fascinating, yes, totally, because Donald Trump weighs in on this, and it gives Burrows credibility. It gives him punching power.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially against Dan Patrick. And that's going to be where the real fight is the rest of the session, right?
Yep.
It's not going to be necessarily between Republicans, although there's some of that. Democrats honestly have just marginalized themselves, and I say that on purpose. And so really now the fight is between the House and the Senate, as it often comes down to, especially this late time of the cycle in the session. So I do think that that gives Burrows a bit of punching power. And I know that you guys are both fellow bearded political watchers, and so that is obviously a big plus.
But I think, to the contrary of what you say, I think that there's not going to be enough animosity. There's going to be now, we have been knighted by Donald Trump, and now we're going to play nice.
They're all in the round table.
Exactly.
As such. Okay.
So now if there is things to be smoothed out, I think that Boris and Patrick are going to be sitting down, having a coffee or something like that.
Yeah, like the breakfast or
Exactly. And just saying like, what do you want to do here, let's do it, shake hands, get it done.
Maybe so.
And move things more speedily.
I think that's true. And, as the session unfolds more, we'll kind of get to some of these things. But there are some things that there are differences on. So I think that those differences might be magnified at a time where Burrows can stand up for the House. And although Democrats have been kind of struggling to kind of get closer to a victory on any piece of legislation that's not sort of a priority for Republicans, it's still the case that they're having to have Burrows stand up for them to Patrick, which maybe they will, maybe they won't. But we'll see how this plays out. But that to me is the most interesting of these tensions. So that's one thing. The other is that, as I've said before, that Texas politics is now national politics. We don't have the distinctive brand of Texas politics where members can vote their districts, right? Now they're all basically, and we talked about this when we talked about vouchers a couple of weeks ago, now they're all fundamentally kind of pulling in that same direction because leadership is telling them to do that. Even if maybe it's not so much in their favor and their districts are against it, they're getting kind of red flags from school districts saying, enough is enough. Those things are all problematic for them. But Donald Trump says, Greg Abbott says, so they do it. I think that's one thing that has serious implications because of the kind of partisanship and polarization that happens. The other is that Texas has oddly now become a kind of single issue state, right? The voucher thing has really kind of taken over the session and really the election. So for the last 8-9 months, that's really all people have talked about. Now that Abbott has this, the rest of this is sort of just gravy. I mean, there's some things he's going to get and some things he's not going to get just because of the dynamics of the session, but he's got what he needs. So honestly, if for him, he can just say, look, it's been great. Let's, roll out the champagne, take a victory drink, and then everybody goes back to what they're doing. So I think that there's a moment where Abbott is sort of just says, okay, we're good with all of this because we've got the one issue done that we promised and really demanded to get done. But they're still legislating, obviously. One of the things they're legislating on is about the state's abortion ban.
Correct.
There has been serious concern about the dynamics of this, the specifics of this when it comes to what doctors are and are not able to do legally. The interim had many concerns, and you had this as a point of contention during the campaign where a lot of women were saying that these sorts of issues were too unclear and may cause harm, and in some cases very much did. Those stories were heartbreaking. The goal of the legislative session in part was to clarify this. The Senate passed a bill 31-0 in a bipartisan, totally unanimous fashion that clarified the medical exemptions in the bill. And really, the good news is that it effectively has been sort of supported by everybody. Under the changes, some specific things include it allows for doctors to perform an abortion if the patient is experiencing a life-threatening trauma capable of causing death. And the bill also requires doctors to receive training on the revised law, which also is good.
Correct.
So there have the Bresnans, Amy and Steve, have been pressing for this for a while because they see what everyone saw, which was that there's just this lack of clarification. Now they finally kind of get the law, the medical board can follow up, and now things seem like they're at least in good shape. It's all too rare that the ledge has this kind of moment of clarity.
That the ledge, and not only the ledge, but also people that are involved, anti-abortion groups, the medical board, medical organizations, everybody was on the same wagon. which is something
very rare.
Very rare.
Yeah, experts,
Yes.
the politicians themselves, the parties. I mean, there's obviously agents who
Yes.
aren't as happy on both sides.
Yes.
But even somebody like Sarah Eckhart, right, who's one of the most liberal senator, if not the most liberal senator, says, not happy to vote for it per se because she doesn't agree with the law itself. But this makes things less cruel and more clear.
Yep.
So as a result, that's a win. That's a legislative win. I can't remember the last time that happened.
I don't know either.
I have to say.
I'm too young to remember.
That's true. And he blocked out the last session anyway.
Right.
Like, we don't need more of that. But look, I don't want to make the case that things are necessarily going smoothly. This is a family squabble. There are going to be, just like Thanksgiving dinner, some mashed potatoes thrown, people aggressively, sometimes passive-aggressively cutting their turkey a little too hard.
The green beans.
Exchanging ugly glances at each other. Republicans and Democrats are fighting in part because Republicans are fighting other Republicans. And what I mean is that you have a group of insurgents in the Texas House who have declared open war on GOP leadership. This is a group of Freedom Caucus members like Briscoe Cain, Troy Tinderholt, Steve Hoth, who have been very vocal about their dissatisfaction with Burrows from the start. They wanted Cook. They didn't get Cook. They got Burrows. And so they're mad about it. And the madness, their anger has spilled over into essentially killing what we call the LNC calendar, the local and consent calendar. These are bills that are totally consensual bills, sometimes a little tax hike because of a local municipal issue. Sometimes it's like a ceremonial issue. We talked about these a little bit
Managing white-tailed deer population, for instance.
Yes, like really important stuff.
Yeah.
But important because these things
it's important
have to be
for the deer.
Yeah. Right. The deer are very much in favor. The deer lobby is like all over this. But like, that's totally right. Like, these are things that are really important for local governments and for some of these members whose districts need to have these things changed. So like, this aren't earth-changing, policies, but they are important to have. The insurgent group basically has said that they're going to kill every local and consent calendar, which is to say every bill here will die until it's the case that all the GOP priorities are passed. That's a logistical complication regardless.
Oh, yeah.
But in any case, there's concern from Republicans who say, look, time is short. We got a lot to do. We can't have you killing the calendar every single week. And Democrats are looking at it and saying, like, what did we do? Right? People like Harold Dutner saying, this isn't the way to handle this, right? And it's happened before in past sessions in various ways, but never to this scale. So what do you make of how this has come about and what it might mean for the remainder of the session?
Well, obviously, it introduces more complications. And if there's some of the priorities that the governor wants to see passed, those are going to come in a special session. Yeah. So they're just angling for a number of special sessions if they don't do what they're supposed to be doing.
Right. Which is very little appetite for. And I think even among like Abbott and Patrick, I mean, Patrick is a different sort of take on this, but I doubt Greg Abbott wants to have another special. It just creates more possibilities of things going wrong, or being kind of embarrassed if things don't go right.
As you said, I think Governor Abbott wants to see the gravy, right? And if there's no gravy, then the turkey is, very dry.
It's very dry.
You will eat it.
Yeah.
And he has a turkey with the vouchers, but a little gravy goes. Good.
Just make it like a little more interesting.
More smooth. So I think that
I'm hungry. Like
it's a different way. It's pushing the envelope to one way that eventually politics in the state legislature are going to become unbearable whenever, for example, Democrats take control. Democrats will take control when. Who knows? But this is going to happen because it has happened before in Texas. Texas is a one-party state. And eventually Democrats are going to be in power. And the question is, are they going to return the favor? And if they return the favor, again, that's bad for the state. It's bad for policy making. It's bad for all of us here in this great state. So it's going to have a lot of implications. Yes, it's a small group of Republicans, but now that Speaker Burrows got that quote-unquote endorsement for Donald Trump,
right.
I think he has a little bit more of political capital and say, like, okay, We need to get this thing done.
And these aren't members who have a lot of traction anyway. And so now, obviously, the kind of fact that Burrows can pick up the Trump phone and say, get the White House immediately and get them to cool it would actually be pretty interesting.
And the other Republicans that want to pass their legislation. That
no one wants these dead.
Right.
Yeah, they have to have this go.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Speaking of Democrats taking control, none other than Beto O'Rourke this week implied that if the people want it, he would run for Senate.
Yes.
Obviously, there's a long history here we don't have time to go into because we've talked about this so many hours over the past couple of years. So basically, in 22, he loses to Abbott by 11 points. Before that, he lost to Cruz in 18 by 3 points, but he raises big money. I think this is probably not a good idea for Democrats. I think, honestly, Democrats need him right where he is, which is raising money, raising the profile of the party, keeping people engaged, making sure the base is happy. We don't, as Democrats, the Democrats in this state don't have a lot of kind of like leaders, right? They don't have people who are sticking around, like MJ Hager, right? Who ran. Cristina Sanzun Ramirez, who moved on to do kind of more national politics. Even Colin Allred. They're all one and dones. They need people to really invest in the party, raising money, keeping the base happy. That's what O'Rourke is doing. They don't need him front and center.
But then the big question is, who do you run?
That's a different podcast. That's for the different show. But Democrats are still trying to find that person. I just don't think it's him. But maybe he's the only option. If so, that would be pretty interesting
because
race.
The next midterm could be 2018, redo 2.0, and maybe Democrats have a chance. But before we go, we just want to give a big shout out to our friends in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
WTJX.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening and watching.
Absolutely. So for this week, that's it. I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. The conversation keeps up next week.